Imagine waking up before the sun, your breath fogging in the chilly air of a cramped, drafty hut, your stomach growling because last night's meal was nothing but a thin gruel of barley and a crust of stale bread. You're a serf in medieval Europe, and your life is about to unfold in the most tedious, backbreaking, and downright miserable way possible. Welcome to a 2-hour journey through the muddy fields, endless toil, and quiet desperation of serfdom. A story so dull and plotting it might just lull you to sleep. Perfect for our boring history tale. My name's Noah Theodore, and tonight we're diving into why it truly sucked to be a serf, a life tied to the land, bound by duty, and weighed down by the slow, grinding monotony of survival. So, settle in, close your eyes, and let the dreary saga of medieval Europe carry you off to dreamland, or at least make you yawn. Picture yourself as Eadric, a serf born in the year 1032, in a soggy little village in the heart of England. Your home is a wattle-and-daub shack, walls of woven sticks and mud, the roof a mess of thatch that leaks every time it rains, and it rains a lot. You're not free. Not really. You belong to the land, and the land belongs to Lord Baldwin, a stern man with a bushy beard and a temper that flares when the crops don't grow fast enough. Eadric, you wake at dawn, your bones aching from sleeping on a straw mat, the same mat your wife, Aelfgifu, and your 2 kids, little Wulfric and baby Seinberg, share. The air smells of damp earth and the faint smoke from a fire that barely kept you warm. You pull on your rough tunic, the same one you've worn for weeks, patched and stiff with dirt, and step outside to face another day of toil. This is your life, day after day, and it's not going to get better anytime soon. Your village, a cluster of maybe 20 huts, sits at the edge of Lord Baldwin's manor, surrounded by fields that stretch on forever. Fields you'll work until your hands blister and your back bends. As a serf, you're not a slave, not exactly, but freedom is a distant dream. You can't leave the land without the Lord's permission, and he's not the type to grant it. You owe him 3 days of work every week, plowing his fields, sowing his wheat, reaping his barley. The tools are heavy, the wooden plow clumsy, and the oxen stubborn, plodding along at a pace that makes you want to scream, if you had the energy. The other days, you tend your own tiny strip of land, a patch barely big enough to feed your family. Last year, you harvested just enough grain to make bread for 6 months, and even then, you had to mix in ground acorns to stretch it. Aelfgifu spends her days grinding that grain by hand, a slow, tedious task that turns her fingers raw, while Wulfric, only 7, toddles behind you in the fields, picking stones from the soil until his little hands are caked with mud. Life as a serf isn't just hard. It's boring, a slow drip of sameness that wears you down. Every morning, you trudge to the fields, the mud sucking at your worn-out shoes, the kind cobbled from scraps of leather that fall apart every few months. You plow the same furrows, plant the same seeds, and pray the same quiet prayers for a harvest that's never quite enough. The sky above is gray, the day's long, and the work never ends. Lord Baldwin's steward, a wiry man named Godwin, watches you like a hawk, tallying every bushel of grain you owe the manor. You hand over half your crop, sometimes more if the Lord's feeling greedy, and pay extra taxes for everything. A penny to use the mill, a chicken to bake in the Lord's oven, even a fee to let your pigs root in his woods. Last week, Godwin demanded 2 eggs from your 3 scrawny hens, and you gave them up, knowing if you didn't, the Lord's men might drag you to the manor court, a drafty hall where justice is as cold as the stone walls. The seasons crawl by, each one bringing its own dull misery. Spring means plowing, your hands gripping the plow for hours, the wood splintering your palms. Summer is reaping, swinging a sickle until your arms feel like lead. The sun, when it bothers to shine, burning your neck. Autumn brings the harvest, a race against rain to gather crops before they rot. And winter, well, winter's the worst. The fields lie bare, the wind howls through your hut, and you huddle close to Aelfgifu and the kids, trying to stay warm with a fire that's mostly smoke. Food runs low, your stores of grain and dried peas dwindle, and you're lucky if you have a bit of salted pork to flavor the pot. One winter, 3 years back, the frost came early and the harvest failed. Your neighbor, old Senric, lost 2 of his kids to hunger, their little bodies too weak to fight the cold. You and Aelfgifu scraped by, but Seinberg cried for days, her tiny belly empty, and you felt helpless, your heart heavy as the frozen ground. Then there's the church, always looming over your life like a shadow. Father Aelric, the village priest, preaches every Sunday in a stone chapel, his voice droning on about sin and salvation. You're expected to give a 10th of your crops, your tithe, to the church, even when you barely have enough to eat. Last month, Father Aelric scolded you for missing a holy day, but you were too busy fixing a fence the Lord demanded repaired, a task that took 2 days of hauling timber and tying it with twine. The church bells ring at dawn, at noon, at dusk, a constant reminder of your duties, and you kneel in the dirt, muttering prayers you've said 1,000 times. Some days, you wonder if God's even listening to a serf like you, stuck in this muddy corner of medieval Europe, where life is a cycle of work, sleep, and worry. Danger lurks, too, though it's slow and sneaky, not the kind of excitement anyone wants. Bandits sometimes creep through the woods, stealing a pig or a sack of grain if you're not careful. Last year, a rumor spread of a raid 2 villages away. Homes burned, families scattered. But Lord Baldwin's knights, clad in clanking armor, did little to help. They're too busy feasting in the manor, eating meat and bread you'll never taste. And then there's disease, a quiet terror that stalks the village. 2 summers ago, a fever swept through, and Aelfgifu's sister, Mildrith, coughed for weeks until she lay still, her face pale as the moon. You've buried her in the churchyard, digging the grave yourself, the soil heavy and unyielding. You wonder when the next sickness will come, and if it'll take Wulfric or Seinberg, or maybe you, leaving your family to fend for themselves. Your days blend together, a blur of mud, sweat, and exhaustion. You're up before dawn, working Lord Baldwin's land, then your own, then back to his, the hours dragging on like a cart stuck in a mire. Aelfgifu toils beside you when she can, her hands chapped from washing, her eyes tired but kind. Wulfric tries to help, carrying water in a leaky bucket, but he's so small, and you worry he'll grow up knowing nothing but this grind. Seinberg, barely 2, clings to Aelfgifu's skirts, her cries soft but constant when hunger gnaws. You love them, your family, and that love keeps you going, but it's buried under the weight of taxes, tithes, and the Lord's endless demands. Some nights, you lie awake, the straw poking your back, and dream of a life where you're free. Free to leave, free to rest, free to keep what you grow. But that's a fantasy, and serfs don't get fantasies. Today, though, something's stirring in the village, a ripple in the dull routine. It's late summer, 10:32, and the harvest is almost in, the wheat stalks golden but sparse after a dry spell. You're in the field, sweat dripping down your face, when Godwin, the steward, rides up on a horse, his expression sour. He shouts that Lord Baldwin's called a meeting at the manor, all serfs required, no exceptions. Your heart sinks. Meetings mean trouble, maybe a new tax, maybe more work. Aelfgifu looks at you, worry in her eyes, and you squeeze her hand, trying to be strong. You gather Wulfric and Seinberg, trudge through the mud, and join the crowd of serfs, all tired, all nervous. Lord Baldwin steps out, his cloak a dull red, his voice low and gruff. He speaks of a bad harvest, of debts to the king, and then he says something that makes your blood run cold. He's raising the labor days to 4 a week, and there's a new fee for the mill, one you can't possibly pay. Murmurs ripple through the crowd, but no one dares speak. You glance at Aelfgifu, her face pale, and think of the winter ahead. Less food, less time, more misery. What can you do? A serf with no power, no voice. The sun dips low, the air grows chill, and Lord Baldwin turns back to the manor, leaving you standing there, the weight of his words settling like dust. How will you survive this? Will your family make it through the cold months? Or will this be the year that breaks you? That's where we'll pause, my friends, in the muddy fields of medieval Europe, with Eadric and his family facing a future bleaker than ever. Why did it suck to be a serf? The toil, the taxes, the hunger, the endless, boring grind. It's all here, and we've only just begun. Settle in. Let the monotony wash over you. And join me in the next part of this sleepy saga, where we'll follow Eadric through the slow, dreary days of serfdom, a life so dull it might just send you drifting off. Good night, sleep tight, and I'll see you in the fields of Somnolia, or wherever your dreams take you. The village square was thick with tension as Lord Baldwin's words sank in. 4 days a week on his fields, plus a new fee to grind their grain at the mill, it was a sentence to deeper misery. Eadric, a serf in the year 1032, stood among his neighbors in the muddy heart of their small English village, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and frustration. Aelfgifu, his wife, gripped his arm, her face pale under her worn headscarf. Their son, Wulfric, just 7, clung to her skirts, his eyes wide with confusion, while baby Seinberg babbled in her arms, unaware of the storm brewing. The serfs around them murmured, their voices low but heavy with dread. "How will we survive this?" a man named Leofric muttered, his hands knotted with worry. "The mill fee alone will take our last pennies." A woman nearby, Hilda, pulled her shawl tighter and shook her head. "We'll have nothing left for winter." Eadric joined a small knot of serfs at the edge of the crowd, where old Senric, his face carved with lines from decades of toil, spoke in a gravelly voice. "This isn't the first time the Lord's tightened his grip," Senric said, leaning on a stick. "I've seen it before. More work, more taxes, less for us. But we've no choice. We work harder, eat less, and pray the Lord above takes pity." Eadric wanted to argue, to demand a way out, but the truth in Senric's words was undeniable. They were serfs, bound to the land, their lives owned by Lord Baldwin's manor. "What else can we do?" Eadric asked, his voice cracking. "We're trapped." Senric's eyes met his, weary but resolute. "We endure," he said simply. The words settled like a stone in Eadric's chest as he led his family back to their hut, the mud sucking at their shoes with every step. Morning came too soon, the air sharp with the chill of late summer. Eadric rose before the sun, his breath visible in the dim light of their wattle-in daub hut. He pulled on his patched tunic, the coarse wool scratching his skin, and wrapped a woolen mantle around his shoulders, its edges frayed from years of use. Aelfgifu was already awake, coaxing a weak fire to life with a handful of twigs. She handed him a small loaf of bread, hard as a rock and gritty with barley husks. "Eat," she said softly, her voice tired but kind. "You'll need it today." Eadric broke off a piece, chewing slowly, the taste bitter and dry. Wulfric stirred on their shared straw mat, rubbing sleep from his eyes, while Seinberg slept on, her tiny snores a small comfort in the gloom. Outside, the village stirred. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the 20-odd huts, and the grunts of pigs and clucks of chickens filled the air. Eadric trudged to Lord Baldwin's north field, where the other serfs were gathering under the watchful eye of Godwin, the steward. Godwin, wiry and sharp-eyed, held a ledger, his quill scratching as he barked orders. "You'll plow today," he said, his voice clipped. "Finish by sunset, or you'll answer for it." Eadric took his place behind a wooden plow, its handles worn smooth by countless hands. The oxen, slow and stubborn, pulled against their yokes, and Eadric leaned into the task, his muscles straining as the plow carved uneven furrows in the hard earth. Each step was a fight, the soil clinging to the blade, his hands blistering where splinters dug in. Sweat stung his eyes, but he didn't stop. Godwin's gaze was never far away. The sun crawled across the sky, marking hours of relentless toil. Eadric's thoughts drifted to the mill fee, a new tax that would force them to pay to grind their grain into flour. Without flour, there was no bread, and without bread, his family would starve. The thought gnawed at him, as persistent as the ache in his back. At midday, the serfs paused, sitting in the shade of a gnarled oak. Eadric unwrapped a small chunk of cheese from Aelfgifu's cloth, its edges green with mold but still edible. He ate slowly, savoring the faint tang, while around him, the others shared their own meager rations, bread, an onion, a sip of weak ale. Their talk was quiet, filled with the same worries: the Lord's demands, the coming winter, the fear of hunger. The afternoon dragged on, the plow growing heavier with each furrow. By sunset, Eadric's hands were raw, his body screaming for rest. Godwin inspected the field, nodding curtly. "South field tomorrow," he said, and Eadric felt the weight of another day settle on him. He walked home, the sky bruising purple, his steps slow and uneven. Aelfgifu greeted him with a pot of stew, mostly water, with a few turnips and a sprig of parsley, but it was warm, and that was enough. Wulfric hugged his legs, chattering about a bird he'd seen, while Steinberg reached for him, her tiny hands grasping. Eadric lifted her, her warmth easing the ache in his heart, if not his body. Over their meal, Aelfgifu spoke, her voice low. "Hilda says there's a market day next week. We could sell some eggs, maybe buy flour." Eadric nodded, though he knew their 3 hens laid sparingly, and flour was dear. "We'll try," he said, forcing a smile. That night, he lay awake on the straw, the thatch above him leaking a faint drizzle. The future felt like a storm cloud, dark and unyielding, and he wondered how much more they could bear. Weeks passed, each day a mirror of a last. The 4-day labor rules stole time from Eadric's own plot, where his barley grew thin and patchy. Aelfgifu's hands grew rougher from grinding grain, her face gaunt from skipped meals. Wulfric carried water in a leaky bucket, his small frame bent under the weight, while Steinberg's cries grew sharper, her hunger a constant plea. The serfs worked on, their bodies lean, their spirits worn. Then came the feast of St. Michael, a rare day of rest. Church bells rang, calling the village to the green, where a small fair sprouted like a weed in the mud. Stalls offered ribbons, wooden spoons, and a few wilted apples. A juggler tossed stones, and musicians played pipes and drums, their tunes lively but repetitive. Eadric spent a precious penny on a honey cake for Steinberg, her eyes bright as she licked the sticky crumbs. Aelfgifu smiled, a flicker of joy, and Wulfric ran off to chase other children, their laughter a brief defiance of their hard lives. For a moment, Eadric felt lighter, the weight of serfdom lifted by the simple pleasures of the day. But the respite ended abruptly. As the fair wound down, Eadric saw Godwin speaking with Father Aelfgifu, their faces grim. A chill ran through him. Such talks never boded well. That evening, as the serfs gathered for a communal meal of bread and ale, Father Aelfgifu stood, his voice heavy. "My children," he said, "Lord Baldwin has spoken. The harvest was poor, and the church must have its due. From now on, your tithe is 1/4 of your crops, not 1/10. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. 1/4 was unthinkable. They'd have nothing left. Leofric, bold for once, called out, "Father, we're starving already. How can we give more?" Aelric's eyes narrowed. "It is God's will," he said, and the words silenced the crowd. Eadric looked at Aelfgifu, her face ashen. He took her hand, his grip tight, and whispered, "We'll manage." But his voice trembled, and doubt gnawed at him. 1/4 tithe for day's labor, the mill fee. Winter was coming, and with it, a hunger they might not survive. As the serfs dispersed into the night, Eadric felt the darkness close in, a question hanging unanswered. Could they endure this new burden, or would it break them at last? The night after Father Aelric's announcement felt endless, the weight of the new tithe pressing down on Eadric like a millstone. He lay on a straw mat in their cramped hut, the damp air seeping through the wattle and daub walls, listening to the soft breathing of Aelfgifu and the kids, Wulfric and Steinberg. A faint drizzle pattered on the thatch, a steady drip that matched the slow, grinding worry in his mind. 1/4 of their crops to the church, for days a week to Lord Baldwin, and now the mill fee. How could they stretch their meager harvest to survive the winter? Eadric's hands, still sore from the day's plowing, clenched as he stared into the dark. Aelfgifu stirred beside him, her voice a whisper. "We'll find a way, Eadric," she said, her hand finding his. He nodded, though he couldn't see her, and squeezed back, wanting to believe her. But the truth was plain. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and it was getting worse. Morning broke, gray and cold. The sky a blanket of clouds that promised more rain. Eadric rose, his body stiff, and chewed a crust of stale bread, the taste gritty and bland. Aelfgifu was already at work, stirring a pot of thin porridge over the fire, her movements slow from exhaustion. Wulfric, rubbing sleep from his eyes, asked, "Pa, will we have enough to eat?" Eadric's heart sank, but he forced a smile. "We'll manage, lad," he said, ruffling the boy's tangled hair. Steinberg cooed from the mat, her tiny hands reaching for Aelfgifu, who scooped her up and hummed a quiet tune. The family ate in silence, the porridge barely filling their bellies, and then Eadric stepped out into the mud, his worn shoes squelching as he headed to Lord Baldwin's south field. The village was stirring, serfs trudging through the muck, their faces etched with the same weary resignation. Cows lowed in the distance, and a rooster crowed, late and hoarse. Eadric joined the others, taking up a sickle to reap the barley, the blade dull and heavy in his hands. The work was slow, the stalks bending under their own weight, and the mud clung to his legs, making each step a chore. Godwin, the steward, paced nearby, his sharp eyes counting every move, his ledger tucked under his arm. "Move along, Eadric," he snapped. "The Lord needs this field done by dusk." Eadric nodded, biting back a sigh, and swung the sickle again. The motion as familiar as breathing, yet endlessly tiring. The hours dragged, the sun hidden, the air damp and cool, and his thoughts kept drifting to the tithe, the mill, the hunger that loomed. By midday, the serfs gathered under a crooked tree, sharing what little they had: bread, a few boiled eggs, a sip of water from shared bucket. Hilda, a neighbor with a lined face and tired eyes, sat beside Eadric, her voice low. "A quarter to the church," she muttered, tearing a piece of bread. "They'll take our last grain, and we'll starve." Eadric nodded, his mouth full of dry crust. "And the mill fee," he added. "We've barely pennies for that." Leofric, a younger serf, joined in, his hands calloused from years of work. "I heard the lords sending knights to the king. More taxes for war, they say. What's that to us? We'll never see a penny of it." The group fell quiet, the weight of their lives settling over them like the damp air, and then they returned to the field, the reaping stretching on, slow and relentless. Back home, Aelfgifu faced her own battles. The grain from their tiny plot needed grinding, but the mill fee loomed large. She knelt by a flat stone, crushing barley by hand, her fingers aching as the coarse grains turned to rough flour. The 3 hens clucked in their pen, but only 1 egg lay in the straw today, not enough to sell, barely enough to eat. Wulfric helped, carrying sticks for the fire, his small hands trembling with the effort. "Ma, why's the church need so much?" he asked, his voice small. Aelfgifu paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "It's their way, love," she said, her tone gentle but strained. "We give what we can." She didn't say the rest, that giving a quarter might leave them nothing, that winter's cold would bite harder than ever. Steinberg crawled nearby, tugging at a rag, and Aelfgifu watched her, her heart heavy with love and fear. Days plodded on, each one a mirror of the last. Eadric worked Lord Baldwin's fields, the plow and sickle wearing at his strength, while Aelfgifu tended the hut, the kids, the hens. The harvest was coming in, but it was thin, too many dry days, too little rain at the right time. Eadric and his neighbors stacked the sheaves, counting bushels under Godwin's watchful eye. Half went to the Lord, a quarter now to the church, and the mill fee took coins they didn't have. One evening, as the sky turned a dull gray, Eadric and Aelfgifu sat by the fire, figuring their stores. "We've maybe 3 sacks of grain," Eadric said, his voice low. "After the tithe and the Lord, it's barely 2. Aelfgifu's eyes glistened, but she nodded. "We'll stretch it. More acorns, more roots." It was a desperate plan, and they both knew it. The village buzzed with quiet worry. Old Senric, hobbling on a stick, stopped by one night, his face grim. "Heard talk from the manor," he said, warming his hands by their fire. "Lord Baldwin's not done." He's got debts to the king. War costs, they say. Might mean more for us to pay. Eadric's stomach twisted. More? We've nothing left, he said. Cynric shrugged, his eyes tired. Lords don't care, lad. They take, we give. He left, and Eadric and Aelfgifu sat in silence, the fire crackling, the kids asleep on the mat. The thought of more taxes, on top of everything, felt like a yoke too heavy to bear. Then came market day, a faint hope in the gloom. Eadric and Aelfgifu gathered their few goods, 2 eggs, a small bundle of dried herbs, a worn wooden spoon Aelfgifu had carved. They walked to the village green, Wulfric trailing behind, Steinberg in Aelfgifu's arms. Stalls lined the muddy square, traders calling out wares. Cloth, pots, a few skinny chickens. Eadric bartered the eggs for a handful of flour, the herbs for a scrap of salt pork. Aelfgifu smiled, a rare lightness in her face, as Wulfric stared wide-eyed at a juggler tossing sticks. For a moment, the grind of serfdom lifted, the air filled with chatter and the smell of baked bread. But the coins from a spoon barely covered half the mill fee, and Eadric's hope faded as fast as it came. That night, a storm rolled in, the wind howling, rain lashing the hut. Eadric patched the thatch with straw, his hands cold and wet, while Aelfgifu huddled with the kids, the fire sputtering. Thunder rumbled, and Wulfric whimpered, Pa, is it safe? Eadric knelt, pulling him close. It's just rain, lad. We're here. But as the storm raged, a new fear crept in. Word spread through the village, carried by a drenched Leofric, who banged on doors in the dark. The streams rising, he panted, water dripping from his cloak. Floods coming. Might take the fields, the stores. Eadric's heart raced as he looked at Aelfgifu, her eyes wide with panic. Their grain, their hope, sat in a low shed by the stream. If the flood took it, winter would be a death sentence. He grabbed his mantle, ready to run, but the rain pounded harder, the night black as pitch. Could they save their stores in time, or would the waters wash away their last chance to survive? The rain hammered down, a relentless roar against the thatch of Eadric's hut, the wind howling like a beast through the cracks in the wattle and daub walls. Inside, Aelfgifu clutched Wulfric and Steinberg close, their small bodies trembling as thunder crashed overhead. Eadric's heart pounded, Leofric's warning echoing in his ears. The stream of drows, usually a sluggish trickle, was swelling, threatening to flood the fields and the low shed where their precious grain was stored. Stay here, Eadric told Aelfgifu, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. He grabbed his tattered mantle, the wool soaked before he even stepped outside, and plunged into the storm, the mud sucking at his shoes, the rain stinging his face. Life as a serf in medieval Europe already sucked, but this night, in the soggy year of 1032, it was about to get worse. Outside, the village was chaos, a blur of shadows in the downpour. Serfs ran through the muck, their shouts drowned by the storm, some carrying buckets, others dragging sacks, all desperate to save what little they had. Eadric stumbled toward the shed, a rickety structure of wood and straw near the stream's edge, where his family's grain, 2 meager sacks, all they had left after the Lord's cut and the church's tithe, sat vulnerable. The stream roared, a muddy torrent now, lapping at the banks, inching closer to the shed. Leofric was there, his cloak plastered to his skin, heaving a sack of his own on a higher ground. Hurry, Eadric, he yelled, his voice barely audible. It's rising fast. Eadric waded in, the water cold and knee-deep, his hands fumbling as he grabbed a sack, the weight heavy against his aching shoulders. He dragged it to a rise, a small hillock where other serfs piled their goods, their faces grim in the flickering light of a few torches. Hilda, her shawl sodden, wrestled with a bundle of barley, her hands slipping in the wet. We'll lose it all, she gasped, her eyes wild. Eadric didn't answer, his breath ragged as he went back for the second sack. The water was higher now, swirling around the shed, tugging at its walls. He yanked the door open, mud and rain in his eyes, and seized the sack just as the stream surged, a wave crashing in, soaking the grain. He hauled it out, his muscles burning, and stumbled to the rise, dropping it beside the first. The shed groaned, then tilted, half its base washed away, but Eadric had no time to mourn. Other serfs shouted for help, their own stores at risk. The night dragged on, a slow, wet misery. Eadric worked alongside Leofric, Hilda, and others, pulling sacks, barrels, even a few scrawny chickens to safety. The rain never let up, the mud growing deeper, the cold sinking into his bones. By dawn, the storm eased to a drizzle, and the village stood in a soggy silence. The stream still high, but no longer rising. Eadric checked his sacks. Damp, some grain swollen with water, but salvageable, he hoped. Aelfgifu met him at the rise, Seinberg in her arms, Wulfric at her side, their faces pale with worry. "Is it safe?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eadric nodded, too tired to speak, and led them back to the hut. The floor now a muddy puddle, the fire long drowned. They huddled together, sharing a damp blanket, the kids shivering, and Eadric felt the weight of serfdom heavier than ever. Morning revealed the damage. Fields were flooded, the barley and wheat flattened, mud coating everything. Lord Baldwin's steward, Godwin, trudged through, his boots squelching, his ledger somehow dry. "The Lord's fields took a hit," he barked, eyeing the serfs. "You'll work extra to replant. No excuses." Eadric's stomach sank. More work on top of 4 days a week, the tithe, the mill fee. He glanced at his neighbors, their eyes hollow, their hands clenched. Old Senric, leaning on his stick, muttered, "Always more, never less." The serfs nodded, too weary to argue, and set to work, digging ditches to drain the water, their shovels slow in the heavy soil, the task stretching endlessly before them. Days crawled by, the village a mess of mud and labor. Eadric spent hours in the fields, salvaging what he could, his back bent, his hands raw from the shovel. Aelfgifu dried their grain by the fire, turning it slowly, praying it wouldn't rot. The kids helped, Wulfric hauling sticks, Seinberg toddling behind, her little shoes caked with dirt. Food was scarcer now. The flood had spoiled half a sack, and their stores shrank daily. One night, they ate a thin stew of roots and a single egg, the taste bland, the portion small. Aelfgifu looked at Eadric, her eyes tired. "We need more," she said softly. "The market's tomorrow. Maybe we trade again?" Eadric nodded, though their goods were few, and hope felt thin as the broth in their pot. Market day dawned gray, the air damp but still. Eadric and Aelfgifu gathered what they could. 3 eggs, a handful of wilted herbs, a small basket of soggy grain. They dried as best they could. They walked to the village green, Wulfric carrying the basket, Seinberg in Aelfgifu's arms, cooing softly. The market was quieter than before. The flood's toll clear, fewer stalls, fewer goods, traders' faces drawn. Eadric bartered the eggs for a tiny sack of flour, the herbs for a scrap of cloth to patch their clothes. A peddler offered a halfpenny for the grain, but Eadric haggled, his voice steady, and got a penny, enough for a bit of salt. Aelfgifu smiled, a flicker of relief, and Wulfric stared at a baker's stall, the smell of bread a rare tease. Eadric wished he could buy a loaf, but the mill fee loomed, and he turned away. Back home, the grind resumed. Eadric worked Lord Baldwin's fields, planting new seeds in the muddy earth, the work slow and tedious. Godwin watched, his quill scratching, tallying every move. The serfs toiled in silence, their bodies bent, their spirits low. One day, a rumor spread. Lord Baldwin was hosting a feast for a visiting noble, and the serfs were to bring extra goods: pigs, chickens, grain. Eadric's heart sank. They had 1 pig, scrawny and precious, and losing it would hurt. Aelfgifu, hearing the news, gripped his hand. "We can't spare it," she whispered. Eadric nodded, but Godwin's orders were clear: deliver by week's end, or face the manor court, a place of cold stone and colder justice. The week plodded on, each day a blur of mud, sweat, and worry. Eadric tended the fields, Aelfgifu the hut, the kids trailing behind, their small hands busy with small tasks. The pig, a wiry creature, rooted in the pen, its grunts a reminder of what they'd lose. One evening, Old Senric stopped by, his face grim. Heard the nobles coming with demands, he said, warming his hands by their weak fire. More taxes, maybe, for the king's wars. Baldwin's in a mood. Eadric's chest tightened. We've nothing left to give, he said, his voice low. Senric shrugged, his eyes tired. We never do, lad. The day of the feast loomed, and tension gripped the village. Eadric and Aelfgifu prepared their offering, the pig squealing as they tied its legs, their hearts heavy. They joined the other serfs, a weary line trudging to the manor, carrying baskets of grain, a few hens, their lone pig. The manor loomed, its walls gray and stern, smoke rising from a feast they'd never taste. Godwin met them, his eyes sharp, checking each gift. Adequate, he muttered, waving them off. Eadric felt the loss of the pig like a blow, knowing winter would be leaner now. As they turned to leave, a horn sounded, and hoofbeats echoed. Riders approaching, the noble's banner flapping in the wind. A cry rang out from the manor, urgent, sharp. The Lord needs more, now. Eadric froze, Aelfgifu's hand tight in his, as Godwin turned, his gaze cold. What more could they take, and how would they live without it? The horn's blast cut through the damp air, and the hoofbeats grew louder, a steady thud against the muddy ground outside Lord Baldwin's manor. Eadric stood frozen, his hand tight around Aelfgifu's, their lone pig already handed over to Godwin, the steward, whose cold eyes now darted toward the approaching riders. The cry from the manor, the Lord needs more now, hung heavy, a fresh weight on the serf's weary shoulders. Wulfric, clinging to Eadric's leg, looked up, his small face creased with worry, while Seinberg whimpered in Aelfgifu's arms, sensing the tension. The village, a cluster of tired souls in the shadow of the gray stone manor, waited in silence, their baskets and hens already given, their hearts sinking. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and in this muddy moment of 1032, with a noble's banner flapping in the wind, it was about to suck even more. Eadric turned to Aelfgifu, her eyes wide, her lips pressed thin. "What more can we give?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of the riders. Eadric had no answer. Their pig was gone, their grain dwindled, their coin spent on the mill fee. The other serfs, Leofric, Hilda, and the rest, shuffled in the mud, their faces gaunt, their hands empty. Godwin strode forward, his cloak flapping, his ledger tucked under his arm. "You heard the Lord," he barked, his gaze sweeping over them. "The noble, Lord Ranulf, brings word from the king, supplies for war, and quickly. Bring what you have, grain, fowl, anything." Eadric's stomach twisted. Their hut held barely enough to last the winter, 3 chickens, a sack of soggy barley, a few roots. To give more was to court starvation. The riders, a dozen knights in clanking chainmail, reined in their horses, steam rising from the beasts in the cool air. Lord Ranulf, a broad man with a stern face and a fur-lined cloak, dismounted, his boots splashing in the mire. Lord Baldwin emerged from the manor, his own cloak a dull red, his beard bristling as he bowed slightly. "Welcome, my lord," Baldwin said, his voice gruff. "We're honored." Ranulf nodded, his eyes scanning the serfs like they were cattle. "The king needs provisions, grain, meat, wool, for the campaign north. Your manor's share is due." Baldwin's jaw tightened, and he turned to Godwin. "Get it done," he snapped, then led Ranulf inside, where the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread drifted out, a feast the serfs would never touch. Godwin rounded on the serfs, his voice sharp. "You heard them. Back to your huts. Bring every scrap you've got. No dawdling." Eadric exchanged a look with Aelfgifu, her face pale, and they turned homeward, the mud slowing their steps. Wulfric trudged beside them, his small hand in Eadric's, asking, "Pa, will we have food left?" Eadric forced a nod. "We'll make do, lad," he said, his throat tight. The village was quiet, save for the squelch of feet and the low murmurs of fear. Hilda, walking nearby, clutched a single hen, her voice bitter. "They'll take it all, Eadric. We'll be eating dirt by spring." Leofric, behind her, muttered, "War for the king, hunger for us." Back at the hut, The air was damp, the fire a weak flicker. Aelfgifu set Steinberg down, the baby cooing on the straw mat, and began gathering what little they had. "The chickens," she said, her hands trembling as she pointed to the pen. "And half the grain, maybe?" Eadric nodded, his heart heavy, and stepped outside to the rickety pen, where their 3 hens clucked, thin and scruffy. He caught 2, their feathers damp, their squawks faint, and tied their legs with twine. Aelfgifu scooped a small pile of barley from their sack, her fingers careful, her eyes glistening. "This is half what's left," she said, her voice low. "Winter's long, Eadric." He touched her shoulder, wishing he could promise more, but words failed him. They walked back to the manor, the serfs a weary line, carrying chickens, small sacks of grain, bundles of roots. Wulfric carried a tiny basket of acorns, his face serious, while Steinberg dozed in Aelfgifu's arms. The manor yard was a mess of mud and tension, Godwin pacing, his quill scratching as he tallied each offering. 2 hens, half a sack, Eadric said, handing over their goods. Godwin's eyes narrowed. "That's it," he snapped. "Lord Ranulf expects more." Eadric's fists clenched, but he stayed silent, defying the steward men of fine, or worse, a day in the stocks. Old Senric hobbled up, offering a single gnarled turnip, his hands shaking. "All I've got," he rasped. Godwin sneered but took it, moving on. Inside the manor, laughter and the clink of cups echoed, the lords feasting on pork and ale, a world apart from the serfs' hunger. Eadric stood with Aelfgifu, watching their goods pile up, chickens, grain, a few pigs, knowing they'd seen none of it. The day dragged, the air cold, the serfs' spirits sinking. By dusk, Godwin waved them off, his voice curt. "Go home. Pray the king's pleased." Eadric led his family away, the mud heavy, their hearts heavier. Back at the hut, they ate a thin gruel of roots and water, the last hen clucking alone in the pen. Wulfric, chewing slowly, looked at Eadric. "Pa, why do they take so much?" Eadric sighed. "No answer good enough." "It's the way, lad," he said, hating the truth. The next morning, the grind resumed. Eadric trudged to Lord Baldwin's fields, the soil still wet from the flood, his shovel slow as he dug ditches to drain it. The other serfs worked beside him, their movements sluggish, their talk quiet. Leofric, heaving mud, muttered, "Heard Ranulf's staying a week. More demands, I'd wager." Hilda, nearby, nodded, her hands caked with dirt. "They'll bleed us dry and laugh while we starve." Eadric kept digging, the ache in his back a constant companion, his mind on the lone hen, the half-sack of grain, barely enough for a month, let alone winter. At home, Aelfgifu faced her own toil. She swept the muddy floor, the broom worn to stubs, and tended the fire, its smoke stinging her eyes. The last hen laid 1 egg, a small hope, but she saved it, knowing they'd need it later. Steinberg crawled nearby, tugging at her skirt, while Wulfric fetched water, the bucket leaking, his steps careful. Aelfgifu knelt to grind the last of their barley, her hands sore, her thoughts on the cold months ahead. She whispered a prayer, asking for strength, for a miracle, but the church's new tithe, a quarter of their crops, loomed large, and faith felt thin. Days plodded on, each one a dull echo. Eadric worked the fields, planting seeds in soggy soil, the work slow, the yield uncertain. Godwin watched, his ledger ever present, his demands unending. One evening, old Senric stopped by, his face grim. "Talk at the manor," he said, warming his hands. "Ranulf's pushing Baldwin. More grain, more wool, maybe a levy of men for the king's fight." Eadric's blood ran cold. "Men? Us?" he asked. Senric shrugged. "Maybe. They don't care we're needed here." Aelfgifu, listening, gripped Eadric's arm, her eyes wide. A levy, serfs torn from their families, sent to die in some lord's war, was a new terror. The week stretched, the manor a hive of activity, knights and carts coming and going. Rumors flew, more taxes, a call for labor, even talk of taking tools or livestock. Eadric and Aelfgifu lay awake, the straw mat poking their backs, whispering fears. "If they take you, Aelfgifu said, her voice breaking. What'll we do? Eadric held her, no words to ease her. The next day, as he worked the field, a shout rang out. Godwin, on horseback, galloping toward the serfs, his face hard. To the manor, all of you, he yelled. Eadric's heart raced, his shovel dropping. Aelfgifu ran up, Steinberg in her arms, Wulfric at her side. The serfs gathered, a tired crowd, as Lord Baldwin and Ranulf emerged, their eyes cold. The king's need is dire, Ranulf said, his voice booming. We take more grain, beasts, and men. Eadric's breath caught, Aelfgifu's hand tight in his. Who would go? And would they ever come back? Lord Ranulf's words hung in the damp air like a fog, heavy and cold, as the serf stood in the muddy yard of Lord Baldwin's manor in the year 1032. The king's need is dire, grain, beasts, and men. The visiting noble had declared, his voice a deep rumble, his fur-lined cloak untouched by the mire that coated Eadric's worn shoes. Aelfgifu's hand trembled in Eadric's, her breath quick, her eyes wide with fear as little Wulfric pressed against his leg and baby Steinberg fussed in her arms. The crowd of serfs, tired, gaunt faces like Leofric's and Hilda's, stood silent, their hearts sinking under the weight of yet another demand. Godwin, the steward, paced before them, his sharp eyes glinting, his ledger ready to tally more losses. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and now, with the threat of a levy looming, the slow, grinding misery of their days felt ready to snap. Eadric's mind raced, his chest tight. More grain they could barely spare, beasts they didn't have, and men, him, maybe torn from his family to fight in some distant war for a king he'd never see. He looked at Aelfgifu, her face pale, and squeezed her hand, trying to steady her, though his own fear gnawed deep. Lord Baldwin stepped forward, his dull red cloak flapping, his beard stiff as he nodded to Ranulf. "We'll provide, my lord," he said, his voice gruff. "The serfs will see to it." Ranulf's gaze swept the crowd, cold and unyielding. By week's end, he barked, grain doubled, every spare beast, and 10 able men. The king waits for no one. He turned back to the manor, Baldwin following, the door slamming shut, leaving the serfs to the mud and Godwin's glare. Godwin wasted no time. "You heard them," he snapped, his boots squelching as he pointed. "Back to your huts, grain, pigs, sheep, whatever you've got. And men, step up, or I'll choose." The serfs scattered, their steps heavy, murmurs of dread rippling through. Eadric led Aelfgifu and the kids home, the path a slog of mud, the air thick with worry. Wulfric, his small voice trembling, asked, "Pa, will you have to go?" Eadric knelt, his hands on the boy's shoulders. "I don't know, lad," he said, his throat tight, "but I'll stay if I can." Aelfgifu's eyes glistened, and she turned away, clutching Steinberg, hiding her fear from the children. Inside their wattle and daub hut, the air was damp, the fire a weak glow. Eadric and Aelfgifu took stock, their hands moving slowly, their hearts heavier. One hen clucked in the pen, too scrawny to lay often. Half a sack of soggy barley sat by the wall, already stretched thin after the flood and the tithe. "We've no pigs left," Eadric said, his voice low. "The grain's barely enough for us." Aelfgifu nodded, her fingers twisting her apron. "The hen, then," she said, her voice breaking, "and a bit more grain. But if they take you," she trailed off, and Eadric pulled her close, Steinberg between them, the baby's warmth a small comfort in the gloom. They had no choice. Refusing meant the manor court, a fine they couldn't pay, or worse, a whipping. The next day, Eadric trudged to the manor, the lone hen tucked under his arm, a small bundle of grain in a sack. Other serfs joined him, their offerings meager, Hilda with a basket of roots, Leofric with a skinny goat, old Senric hobbling with a handful of acorns. Godwin checked each, his quill scratching, his frown deep. "This all?" he growled at Eadric, eyeing the hen. "The king's army needs more." Eadric's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, knowing a wrong word could cost him. Godwin moved on, barking at others, the pile of goods growing, chickens, a few sheep, damp grain, all the serfs could scrape from their bare lives. The manor's hall glowed with firelight, the lords inside eating and laughing, the smell of meat a cruel tease. Back home, the days dragged, a blur of toil and tension. Eadric worked Lord Baldwin's fields, sowing seeds in the muddy soil, his shovel slow, his back aching. The other serfs labored beside him, their talk quiet, their fears the same. "They'll take me, I know it," Leofric muttered, his hands dirty as he dug. "I've no family. Makes me easy to grab." Hilda, nearby, sighed, her shovel scraping. "And the grain, doubled, they say. We'll starve before spring." Eadric nodded, his thoughts on Aelfgifu and the kids on the levy that hung like a blade. 4 days a week for the Lord, a quarter tithe to the church, the mill fee, and now this. Serfdom was a chain, and it tightened daily. Aelfgifu fought her own battles at the hut. With no hen left, she scoured the woods for roots and berries, her hand scratched, her skirt torn. Wulfric helped, carrying a small bundle of twigs, his face serious, while Seinberg toddled behind, babbling. The fire burned low, the smoke thick, and Aelfgifu ground the last of their grain, her fingers raw, her mind racing. One night, as they ate a thin stew of turnips and water, she looked at Eadric, her voice soft. "If they take you, I'll work the plot, but the kids, how I manage." Eadric took her hand, his calluses rough against her skin. "I won't let them," he said, though he knew the choice wasn't his. The village buzzed with dread as the weeks end neared. Rumors flew, 10 men, young and strong, to march for the king. Old Senric, stopping by one evening, warmed his hands by their fire, his voice low. "Heard Godwin's got a list," he said, his eyes tired. "They'll pick soon, maybe tomorrow." Eadric's heart sank, and Aelfgifu gripped his arm, her breath quick. "You're needed here," she whispered. Senric nodded. "Aye, but lords don't care. They see us as tools, not men." He left, and Eadric lay awake, the straw mat poking his back, the thought of leaving his family a cold knot in his chest. The day came, gray and chilly, the village tense. Godwin rode in on horseback, a parchment in hand, his face stern. The serfs gathered in the square, mud underfoot, the air heavy. Aelfgifu stood by Eadric, Wulfric and Seinberg close, their small hands clinging. Godwin unrolled the parchment, his voice sharp. "The king's levy." Stepped forward when called. He began, naming men, Leofric, young and wiry, his face pale, 2 brothers strong from the fields, a quiet lad named Oswin. Each name hit like a stone, the crowd silent, families trembling. Eadric's breath caught, his hand tight in Aelfgifu's, her eyes wet but steady. Godwin paused, his eyes scanning, and Eadric felt the weight of his gaze. "Eadric, son of Aelfric," the steward called, and the world seemed to slow. Aelfgifu gasped, her grip bruising, Wulfric crying, "Pa, no." Eadric's heart pounded, his mind reeling. Leave his family, his plot, to fight in a war he didn't understand? He stepped forward, his legs heavy, joining the line of men, their faces grim. Godwin nodded, moving on, naming more, but Aelfgifu's quiet sob echoed in Eadric's ears. Lord Ranulf emerged, inspecting the line, his nod cold. "You march tomorrow," he said. "Gear up, say your farewells." The serfs dispersed, the air thick with grief, and Eadric turned to Aelfgifu, her face a mask of fear. Tomorrow he'd go, leaving them to the mud, the hunger, the endless toil. Could they survive without him? Or would serfdom claim them all? The sun dipped lower, painting the sky a dull gray as Eadric and Aelfgifu trudged back from Lord Baldwin's manor, their hearts heavy with the weight of his latest demands. 4 days a week of labor now, a new mill fee, and the ever-present tithe to the church. It was a crushing load for a serf in medieval Europe, and in the year 1032, it felt like the ground itself was pulling them down. Wulfric clung to Eadric's hand, his small fingers cold, his eyes wide with questions he didn't dare ask, while Seinberg fussed in Aelfgifu's arms, her tiny cries a sharp note in the quiet evening. The village around them buzzed with worry, neighbors whispering in doorways, their faces etched with the same fear. How would they survive this winter? Eadric glanced at Aelfgifu, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on the muddy path, and he wished he had words to ease her. But life as a serf offered no comfort, only toil, taxes, and a creeping sense of dread that something worse was coming. Back at their wattle and daub hut, the air was damp, the thatch still leaking from last week's rain. Eadric stoked the fire, a weak pile of twigs that sputtered and smoked, barely warming the small space. Aelfgifu set Steinberg down on the straw mat, the baby squirming, and began sorting their meager stores. 2 sacks of barley, a handful of dried peas, a few turnips, all dwindled by the Lord's cut and the church's tithe. "We'll need to stretch this," she said, her voice steady but thin, her hands trembling as she measured a small pile for supper. Eadric nodded, his own hands still sore from the day's plowing, the wooden plow's splinters a constant sting. Wulfric sat nearby, poking at the fire, his small voice breaking the silence. "Pa, why's the Lord so mean? Don't he know we're hungry?" Eadric's chest ached, and he knelt, pulling the boy close. "It's just a way, lad. Lord's take we give. Always been so." But the words felt hollow, and the question lingered. Why did it have to suck so bad to be a serf? The village had seen hard times before, Eadric knew. His father, Aelfric, had told tales of lean winters, when frost killed the crops and families chewed bark to fill their bellies. Aelfric had been a serf too, bound to this same land, working Lord Baldwin's father's fields until his back bent and his hands gnarled. "We endure," he'd told Eadric, his voice rough, his eyes tired, before a fever took him 5 winters past. Eadric's mother, Eadbert, followed soon after, worn out by years of grinding grain and hauling water. Now, Eadric carried their burden, tied to the manor, his life a cycle of mud, sweat, and submission. He looked at Aelfgifu, her face lit by the fire's faint glow, and thought of her own story. Born to a serf family 2 villages over, married to Eadric at 16, her hands already calloused from weaving and cooking. They dreamed once, in quiet moments, of a life less heavy, but dreams didn't plow fields or pay taxes. The next morning, Eadric rose before dawn, the air cold, his breath fogging as he pulled on his patched tunic. Aelfgifu handed him a crust of bread, hard and stale, and he chewed it slowly, the grit of barley husks rough on his tongue. He stepped out, the village still dark, the only sounds the cluck of a few scrawny hens and the low of a cow. The field stretched ahead, Lord Baldwin's land vast and unyielding, the soil heavy from recent rain. Eadric took up the plow, the oxen plodding at a snail's pace, their yokes creaking as he guided them through the mud. 4 days a week now, 4 long, aching days for the Lord, leaving barely time to tend his own strip of land. The steward, Godwin, rode by, his horse's hooves splashing, his sharp voice cutting through. "Faster, Eadric! The Lord's wheat won't wait." Eadric nodded, his back already screaming, and pushed on, the furrows slow and uneven, the work a dull, endless grind. Back at the hut, Aelfgifu faced her own load. She knelt by the fire, stirring a pot of thin gruel, her hands chapped from days of work. Wulfric trailed her, carrying a small bucket of water from the well, his steps careful, the bucket leaking a steady drip. Steinberg crawled nearby, tugging at a rag, her coos a small light in the gloom. Aelfgifu's mind churned, for days of Eadric gone to the Lord's fields meant less help for their own, and the mill fee, a new penny for grinding grain, loomed large. She thought of her own mother, a woman of quiet strength, who'd taught her to stretch a meal, to mend a tunic, to pray when hope ran thin. But now, with the Lord's demands piling higher, the church's tithe biting deep, those lessons felt fragile. She whispered to herself, "We'll make it," but the words trembled, and the shadow of winter crept closer. The village wasn't always this heavy, Eadric remembered. Years back, before Lord Baldwin's father died, there'd been moments of ease, harvest feasts, when serfs shared ale and bread, a fiddler playing a slow tune. But Baldwin was sterner, his eyes greedy, his demands growing with each season. Taxes came for everything, a penny for the mill, a chicken for the oven, a share of pigs for the woods. Last year, a bad harvest left the village lean, and Eadric's neighbor, Old Senric, lost 2 children to hunger, their small graves a stark reminder in the churchyard. Disease lingered too, a silent threat. 2 summers ago, Aelfgifu's sister, Mildred, faded to a cough and a fever, leaving a hole in their family. Eadric felt it all, the weight of serfdom, the fear of what might come next, and now this new burden from the manor, a mystery of need that pressed harder than ever. Days dragged on, each one a mirror of the last. Eadric worked the fields, the plow heavy, the mud deep, his hands blistered, his mind on the mill fee. Aelfgifu tended the hut, grinding grain by hand to save a coin, her fingers raw, her eyes tired. Wulfric helped, picking stones from their small plot, while Steinberg's cries grew sharper, hunger gnawing at her tiny belly. One evening, old Senric hobbled by, his stick sinking in the mud, his face lined with worry. Heard talk at the manor, he rasped, warming his hands by their fire. Baldwin's in a state. Word from the king, maybe, or a bad debt. They're planning something, mark my words. Eadric's heart sank. More taxes? He asked, his voice low. Senric shrugged, his eyes dark. Could be, or worse. Lords don't tell us till it's done. The rumor spread, a quiet buzz through the village. Hilda, a neighbor, stopped by, her shawl tied around her. They say knights rode in last night. She whispered, her hands twisting. Armed, grim. Maybe war's coming, or a levy. What's it mean for us? Aelfgifu's breath caught, and Eadric felt the dread deepen. War meant more demands, grain, pigs, even men, pulled from their families to fight. He thought of Wulfric, so small, and Steinberg, barely 2, and Aelfgifu left alone to toil. The manor loomed in his mind, a gray shadow, its secrets hidden behind stone walls. That night, as they lay on the straw, the fire low, Aelfgifu whispered, Eadric, what's he planning? More work, more coin, can we bear it? He held her, his heart racing, no answer to give. A distant horn sounded from the manor, sharp and sudden, and voices carried on the wind. Orders, maybe, or a call to gather. Eadric sat up, the dark pressing in. The mystery of Lord Baldwin's next move a cold grip on his soul. What was coming, and how much more could a serf endure? The horn's sharp blast from Lord Baldwin's manor cut through the night, a jarring sound that sent a chill down Eadric's spine as he lay on the straw mat. Aelfgifu beside him, her breath quick with worry. The faint voices on the wind, harsh, urgent, hinted at something brewing, something big, and the serfs of this muddy village in 1032 England could only guess at the trouble. Eadric sat up, the damp air of their wattle and daub hut clinging to his skin, the fire a dying glow that barely lit Wulfric and Steinberg's sleeping forms. Aelfgifu's hand found his, her whisper shaky. Eadric, what's that mean? More work or something worse? He shook his head, his heart thumping, no words to ease her. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and with 4 days of labor, a new mill fee, and the church's tithe already choking them, this new mystery from the manor felt like a storm ready to break. Morning came, gray and heavy, the sky a blanket of clouds, the ground a mess of mud. Eadric rose, his bones aching from the day's plowing, and chewed a dry crust of bread, the taste gritty and stale. Aelfgifu stirred a pot of thin gruel, her hands chapped, her eyes tired as she glanced at the kids. Wulfric rubbing sleep from his face, Steinberg cooing on the mat. Be careful today, she said, her voice low, handing him the bread. Eadric nodded, pulling on his patched tunic, the wool rough against his skin, and stepped out, the village stirring with a nervous hum. Neighbors gathered in doorways, their whispers sharp, talk of the horn, the knights, the Lord's plans. Old Senric, leaning on his stick, hobbled over, his face grim. Riders came late. Eadric, he rasped. Armed men, banners, words they're here for the king. Means trouble for us serfs. Eadric trudged to Lord Baldwin's fields, the mud sucking at his shoes, the air damp and cool. The other serfs, Leofric, Hilda, and more, joined him, their faces drawn, their tools heavy in their hands. Eadric gripped the plow, the oxen plodding slowly, the soil stubborn and wet. The work was dull, endless, the furrows stretching on, his back screaming with each push. Godwin, the steward, rode up, his horse splashing mud, his voice sharp. "Work steady, you lot. The Lord's got eyes on us today." Eadric glanced up, catching sight of figures at the manor. Knights in chain mail, their helmets glinting, moving with purpose. His stomach twisted. More taxes, more labor, or something darker? The question hung, unanswered, as he bent to the plow, sweat mixing with the damp. Back of the hut, Aelfgifu wrestled with her own load. She knelt by the fire, grinding barley by hand, the stone rough against her fingers, saving a penny from a mill fee. Wulfric toddled outside, fetching water in a leaky bucket, his small arms straining, while Seinberg tugged at her skirt, her cries soft but hungry. Aelfgifu's mind churned. 4 days of Eadric gone to the Lord's fields left their own plot neglected, the barley thin, the peas sparse. The church's tithe, a quarter of their crop, loomed like a shadow, and the new mill fee bit deep. She thought of her childhood, a serf's daughter, watching her father toil, her mother stretch meals with acorns and roots. Now, her own family faced the same, and the manor's horn last night hinted at worse. She paused, whispering a prayer, but the words felt faint against the growing dread. The village had a history of burdens, Eadric knew. Decades back, under Lord Baldwin's father, life was hard but steady. Serfs worked 3 days, paid their tithe, and scraped by. But Baldwin, stern and greedy, piled on more. Extra labor, taxes for the mill, the oven, the woods. Last year's bad harvest left scars. Hunger took old Senric's kids, and cold weakened the old. Eadric remembered his own father, Aelfric, bent from years of plowing, telling him, "We're the land's boy, born to it, die on it." Now, Eadric lived that truth, his hands calloused, his days a blur of mud and toil. He thought of Aelfgifu, strong but wearing thin, and Wulfric, growing up to this life, and Seinberg, too small to know the weight. What was the manor planning, and how much more could they bear? Midday brought a brief rest. The serfs huddled under a gnarled oak, sharing bread and water. Leofric, his hands dirty, chewed slowly, his voice low. "Nights mean war, Eadric. The king's fighting north, they say. Needs grain men, maybe us." Hilda, her shawl tight, nodded, her eyes tired. "They'll take our last sack, our last pig, and leave us nothing. Always do." Eadric swallowed his crust, the taste dry, and glanced at the manor, where horses stamped and men moved, their purpose hidden. War? A levy? The thought chilled him. Serfs dragged to battle, leaving families to starve. He stood, the plow waiting, the work unending. The mystery of the Lord's demands a heavy cloud. That evening, Eadric dragged home, his body sore, his shoes caked with mud. Aelfgifu met him, a pot of turnip stew simmering, the smell faint but warm. Wulfric hugged his legs, chattering, "Pa, I saw a knight. Big horse, shiny armor." Eadric forced a smile, lifting Seinberg, her tiny hands grabbing his tunic. They ate, the stew thin, the portion small, and Aelfgifu spoke, her voice quiet. Hilda heard talk. "Knights want supplies, maybe more. What's it mean, Eadric?" He shook his head, his mind racing. "I don't know, love, but we'll face it." The words felt weak, the fire crackling, the night pressing in. Outside, the village hummed with fear, neighbors whispering of war, taxes, strange orders from the manor. Days crawled by, the toil relentless. Eadric worked the fields, the sickle heavy, the barley sparse, Godwin's eyes always watching. Aelfgifu tended the hut, mending clothes with threadbare cloth, stretching meals with roots. Wulfric picked stones, his hands muddy, while Seinberg's cries echoed, hunger a constant guest. One night, old Senric stopped by, his stick tapping the floor, his face grim. "Knights are staying, Eadric," he said, warming his hands. "Talk of a big-ass grain beasts, maybe men for the king." Baldwin's tense, pushing Godwin hard. Eadric's heart sank. "Men? Us?" he asked, his voice low. Aelfgifu's breath caught, her eyes wide. Senric shrugged. "Could be. Lords care for power, not us serfs." The rumor grew, a dark thread through the village. Hilda whispered of carts at the manor, ready for loads, grain, wool, livestock. Leofric spoke of knights training, their swords clashing, a sign of battle ahead. Eadric felt the tension, a knot in his gut, as he plowed, the mud deep, the oxen slow. Aelfgifu at home counted their stores, half a sack, a few roots, 3 hens, too little, with winter near and the Lord's new demands looming. She looked at the kids, Wulfric quiet, Steinberg small, and wondered what was coming. The church bells rang, Father Aelric's voice droning at Mass, but prayers felt distant, the tithe a heavy chain. Then a new sound broke the night. Hoofbeats, fast and close, a rider galloping through the village. Eadric stepped outside, the air cold, Aelfgifu behind him, her hand tied on his arm. A knight, his armor dull in the moonlight, reined in, shouting, "To the manor! All serfs now!" Voices rose, doors opened, neighbors stumbled out, their faces pale. Eadric's pulse raced, Aelfgifu's grip tightening, Wulfric and Steinberg awake, scared. The rider wheeled away, the horn blaring again, urgent, sharp. What did Lord Baldwin want now? More grain, more work, or something far worse? Eadric led his family, the mud cold, the dark deep, the manor's shadow looming, its secrets ready to spill. What new burden awaited, and could they survive it? The knight's hoofbeats faded into the night, the horn's sharp echo lingering as Eadric led Aelfgifu, Wulfric, and Steinberg through the muddy paths of their village in 1032 England. The air was cold, the dark thick, and the manor loomed ahead, its gray stone walls a grim shadow against the moonlit sky. Aelfgifu's hand trembled in Eadric's, her breath quick, her eyes wide with worry as Wulfric clung to his leg, whispering, "Pa, what's happening?" Steinberg whimpered in Aelfgifu's arms, her tiny cries cutting through the murmurs of neighbors stumbling from their huts, their faces pale and tired. The serfs, a weary crowd, moved toward Lord Baldwin's call, their hearts heavy with the weight of 4 labor days, the mill fee, the church's tithe, and now this late-night summons. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and the mystery of this urgent gathering only deepened the dread, a slow, gnawing fear of what new burden awaited. They reached the manor yard, the mud slick underfoot, the air sharp with the smell of damp earth and smoke from the hall's fires. Torches flickered, casting long shadows over the serfs. Leofric, Hilda, old Senric, and dozens more, their tunics patched, their hands rough from toil. Godwin, the steward, stood tall, his cloak flapping, his sharp eyes glinting as he waved them closer. "Line up, you lot," he barked, his voice harsh over the wind. Eadric squeezed Aelfgifu's hand, guiding her and the kids to the edge of the crowd, his pulse racing. Knights in chainmail stood by the manor door, their helmets dull, their hands on swords, a sight that chilled him. What did Lord Baldwin want? More grain, more beasts, or something far worse? The question hung, a heavy fog, as the serfs waited, their breath fogging in the cold. Lord Baldwin emerged, his red cloak dull in the torchlight, his beard bristling, his face stern. Beside him stood a stranger, a tall man in a dark hood, his eyes hidden, his presence heavy. Baldwin raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "Good folk," he said, his voice gruff, "the king's need grows. War brews north, raiders, rebels, a fight we must aid. This man, a messenger, brings orders, more grain, more wool, and labor for the road." The hooded man nodded, stepping forward, his voice low and slow. "The king's army marches soon. Your manor owes sacks of barley, bundles of fleece, and hands to mend the paths now." Eadric's stomach sank, Aelfgifu's grip tightening, her whisper faint. "More work, Eadric? How?" He had no answer, his mind reeling with the weight of it all. Godwin paced, his ledger out, his quill ready. "You heard the Lord," he snapped. "By week's end, double the grain, every scrap of wool, and 10 of you for the roads. Move or face the court." The serfs shifted, their faces grim, their whispers sharp. Leofric beside Eadric muttered, "Double the grain? We've barely a sack. Hilda, her shawl tight hissed. Roads? We're no masons. Starve us. Work us. What's next? Eadric felt the dread deepen, his thoughts on their hut. Half a sack of barley, 3 scrawny hens, no sheep for wool. Winter loomed, hunger a constant guest, and now this. More to give, more to do, and a mystery of what labor for the road meant. He led his family home, the mud slow, Wulfric's small voice trembling. Pa, will you go away? Eadric knelt, his heart aching. Not if I can help it, lad. Inside their hut, the fire sputtered, the air damp, the thatch dripping. Aelfgifu set Signbird down, the baby fussing, and checked their stores. Meager grain, a few roots, the hens clucking outside. We can't double it, she said, her hands twisting her apron, her eyes wet. And roads? You out there days on end? Eadric nodded, his hands sore from the plow, his mind heavy. I'll try, love, he said, pulling her close, Signbird between them, her warmth a faint comfort. They ate a thin stew, turnips and water, the taste bland, the portion small. Wulfric chewed slowly, his eyes big. Why's the king need so much, pa? Eadric sighed, the weight of serfdom pressing down. Taxes, tithes, labor, now this. Kings fight, lad. We pay for it. The words felt bitter, the manners demand chain. Morning broke, gray and wet, the village buzzing with worry. Eadric trudged to the fields, the mud deep, his plow heavy, the oxen plodding. The serfs worked, their sickles slow, their talk low. Leofric, cutting barley, grumbled, roads mean days away, digging, hauling, no rest. Who feed my kin then? Hilda, nearby, nodded, her hands muddy. And wool? I've no sheep. Baldwin takes, leaves us nothing. Eadric pushed the plow, his back aching, his thoughts on a messenger's hooded face. The war north, the king's need. What rebels, what raiders? Why did serfs bear the cost? Godwin rode by, his horse splashing, barking, hurry. The Lord's carts wait. Eadric's fear grew. Carts meant big hauls, and labor on roads hinted at danger, exhaustion, time lost. At the hut, Aelfgifu toiled, her day a blur of grind. She scraped roots, her knife dull, her hands scratched, saving the mill fee. Wulfric hauled twigs, his small frame bent, while Signbird crawled, her cries sharp with hunger. Aelfgifu's heart raced, her mind on Eadric, for days for the Lord. Now roads too? She recalled old Senric's tales, years back, of serfs sent to build bridges, some crushed by stones, others worn to death. The church loomed, Father Aelric's bells ringing, the tithe a quarter of their crop, a burden that starved them. She knelt, praying for strength, but the manor's call, the hooded man's words, felt like a storm brewing, and hope was thin. Days dragged, the toil relentless. Eadric worked the fields, the soil stubborn, his hands blistered, Godwin's eyes sharp. Aelfgifu mended tunics, the cloth thin, her needle slow, stretching their stores. Half a sack, a few peas, the hens laying less. One night, old Senric hobbled in, his stick tapping, his face grim. Heard more, Eadric, he rasped, warming his hands. The messengers talk, war's close, raiders hitting manors. Roads need fixing for the king's men fast. Might take you lot days, weeks. Eadric's breath caught, Aelfgifu's eyes wide. Weeks, she whispered. And us alone? Senric shrugged, his voice low. Lords care for armies, not serfs. The village hummed with fear, rumors flying. Carts piling up, knights drilling, talk of raiders nearing. Hilda whispered of strange tracks in the woods, Leofric of shouts at the manor, urgent, late. Eadric felt the tension, a knot in his gut, as he plowed, the mud thick, the day long. Aelfgifu counted their grain, her hands shaking, winter's chill a threat, the Lord's demands a blade. That night, a new sound, hooves fast, a rider tearing through. Eadric stepped out, the air cold, Aelfgifu behind, the kids awake, scared. A knight reined in, his voice sharp. Serfs, manor dawn, bring goods, be ready, trouble's near. He rode off, the dark swallowing him, the words a chill. Trouble, raiders, war, or worse. Eadric held Aelfgifu, Wulfric and Steinberg close, the manor shadow deep, the mystery growing. What loomed at dawn, and could they face it? The knight's urgent cry, "Serfs, manor dawn, bring goods, be ready, trouble's near," echoed in Eadric's ears as he stood outside his wattle and daub hut, the cold night air biting at his skin. Aelfgifu clung to his arm, her breath quick, her eyes wide with fear as Wulfric and Steinberg huddled close, their small faces pale in the moonlight. The village, a cluster of muddy huts in 1032 England, buzzed with worry, doors creaking open, neighbors whispering of raiders, war, and the king's demands. Eadric's heart pounded, his mind racing, double the grain, wool, labor for roads, and now this vague, chilling trouble. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and the manor's shadow loomed larger, a tangle of burdens and mysteries that tightened around them like a noose, pulling the serfs toward an unknown fate. Inside, the hut was damp, the fire a faint glow, barely warming the straw mat where they sat. Aelfgifu rocked Steinberg, the baby's whimpers soft but sharp, while Wulfric pressed against Eadric, his voice small. "Pa, is trouble bad, men? Will they come here?" Eadric swallowed, his throat tight, and ruffled the boy's hair. "I don't know, lad, but we'll stick together." Aelfgifu looked up, her face drawn, her hands twisting her apron. "Eadric, raiders? We got half a sack, 3 hens. How do we give more? And you on the roads, if trouble's near." Her voice broke, and Eadric pulled her close, his own fear a heavy knot. The Lord's demands, 4 days of labor, the mill fee, the church's tithe, already crushed them, and now this new threat, a dark cloud of danger, left them grasping for hope. Dawn crept in, gray and cold, the village stirring with a tense hum. Eadric rose, his body sore from plowing, and helped Aelfgifu gather what little they had: 2 eggs from the hens, a small bundle of soggy barley, a few wilted roots. "It's not double," Eadric muttered, his hands rough as he tied the sack. Aelfgifu nodded, her eyes tired. "It's all we've got. Pray it's enough." They stepped out, Wulfric carrying the eggs, Steinberg in Aelfgifu's arms, joining the serfs trudging to the manor, their meager offerings clutched tight. Leofric, wiry and grim, walked beside them, a skinny goat trailing him. "Raiders, they say," he grumbled. "Heard tales, burned villages, stolen crops. We're defenseless, Eadric." Hilda, her shawl damp, added, "And roads? Digging in danger? Lord care not if we fall." Eadric's stomach twisted, the word raiders, a new terror, the conflict sharpening. The manor yard was a mess of mud and worry, torches flickering, knights in chainmail pacing, their swords glinting. Godwin, the steward, stood stern, his ledger ready, his voice sharp. "Goods here now. Grain, well, whatever you've got." The serfs lined up, their hands trembling, eggs, roots, a lone sheep, piling into carts for the king's war. Eadric handed over their sack, Godwin's eyes narrowing. "This ain't double," he snapped, cool scratching. Eadric's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet, defying the steward meant the manor court, a fine or worse. Lord Baldwin emerged, his red cloak heavy, beside the hooded messenger, whose gaze felt cold, unreadable. "Trouble's close," Baldwin said, his voice gruff. "Raiders hit a manor east. Carts for the king, roads for his men, and we guard our own. Work fast." Eadric's heart sank. Raiders near, and serfs caught in the middle? The crowd dispersed, whispers flying. Old Senric, hobbling on a stick, caught Eadric's arm, his face lined. "My boys saw smoke east, Eadric. Raiders burning fields. They'll come for grain, pigs, us maybe." Eadric nodded, his mind spinning. Raiders, wild men from the north, tales said, stealing, torching, leaving nothing. He thought of his hut, Aelfgifu and the kids, unprotected, the village's wood and straw no match for fire. Aelfgifu, overhearing, gripped his hand, her voice low. "If they come, Eadric, what then? We've no walls, no strength." He squeezed back, no answer, the conflict swelling, Lord's demands, church's tithe, and now a threat to their lives. Meanwhile, a subplot stirred. Young Wulfric, curious and bold, had slipped off, trailing a knight to the manor's edge, his eyes wide at the armor, the horse. He hid behind a cart, watching as two knights spoke, their voices low. "Raiders, a day off, maybe," one said, his hand on his sword. "Baldwin's green. Won't spare us to fight, just guard his hall." The other spat. "Serfs'll suffer. Roads, carts, then raiders. Poor lot." Wulfric's heart raced, and he ran back, tugging Eadric's tunic. "Ha! Knights say raiders close. They won't help us." Eadric knelt, his breath catching, the boy's words a new angle. Lords and knights safe, serfs left to the storm. Aelfgifu, meanwhile, faced her own struggle. Back at the hut, she knelt by the fire, grinding barley, her hands raw, her mind on the tithe. Father Aelric had lingered after Mass, his voice droning, "A quarter, my child, for God's grace." She nodded, hiding her anger. Grace didn't fill bellies. A neighbor, Mildred's friend Edith, stopped by, her face gaunt. "Aelric's pushing. Aelfgifu says the church needs more, war or not. I've no grain left." Aelfgifu sighed, her hands still. The church a quiet foe, its demands a weight beside the Lord's and the raiders' threat. She looked at Steinberg, cooing, and Wulfric wide-eyed, and felt the conflict tighten. Hunger, faith, and danger, all pressing in. Eadric worked the fields, the plow slow, the mud deep, his thoughts a tangle. Godwin rode by, barking, "Road start tomorrow. 10 of you dawn, tools in hand." Eadric's back ached, his hands blistered, the 4 days' labor already a chain. Roads meant days away, digging, hauling exposed, raiders could strike, and he'd be far from Aelfgifu, the kids. Leofric, nearby, muttered, "Heard raiders hit fast, steel burn gone. We're meat, Eadric." Hilda, cutting stalks, whispered, "My cousin's village east gone, smoke and ash. What's for us?" Eadric's fear grew, the manor's plan a mystery. Guard themselves, leave serfs to toil, and face the storm? Night fell, the village tense, the air cold. Eadric and Aelfgifu sat by the fire, Steinberg asleep, Wulfric listening. "Roads, raiders," Eadric said, his voice low. "I go, you're alone. I stay, we face the court." Aelfgifu's eyes glistened, her hand on his. "And if raiders come? No knights, no walls, just us, Eadric." He nodded. The conflict stark. Lord's orders, church's tithe, raiders' threat, all crushing their lives. A shout broke the quiet, hooves a rider fast. Eadric stepped out, the dark deep, a knight's voice ringing. "Serfs, ready goods, tools, raiders spotted, closer than we thought." Neighbors stumbled out, panic rising, Aelfgifu's grip tight, Wulfric's eyes wide. Smoke drifted on the wind, faint, acrid from the east. Eadric's heart raced. Raiders near, the manor calling, their lives hanging by a thread. What would dawn bring, and could they stand against it? The knight's cry, "Serfs, ready goods, tools, raiders spotted, closer than we thought," rang through the night, a sharp blade of fear slicing into Eadric's chest as he stood outside his wattle and daub hut in the muddy village of 1032 England. The faint whiff of smoke, acrid and unsettling, drifted from the east, and Aelfgifu's grip on his arm tightened, her breath quick, her eyes wide with panic. Wulfric, small and trembling, pressed against Eadric, whispering, "Pa, are they coming for us?" Steinberg whimpered in Aelfgifu's arms, her cries a thin thread in the cold air as neighbors stumbled from their huts, their faces pale, their voices a jumble of worry. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and now, with the Lord's demands, 4 days of labor, the mill fee, the church's tithe, piled atop the looming threat of raiders, the tension coiled tighter, a storm of conflict ready to swallow Eadric and his family whole. Eadric pulled Aelfgifu close, his heart pounding, no words to calm her. "Inside," he said, his voice low, guiding her and the kids back to the hut. The fire sputtered, a weak glow in the damp space, the thatch dripping from a lingering drizzle. Aelfgifu set Steinberg down, the baby fussing on the straw mat, and began gathering 2 eggs, a handful of soggy barley, a worn spade from the corner. For the manor, Dawn, she murmured, her hands shaking, her face drawn. Eadric nodded, his own hands rough from plowing, his mind racing. Raiders, wild men from tales, torching villages, stealing grain, were close, and Lord Baldwin wanted more goods, tools, labor for roads. What if raiders struck while he dug, far from home? The conflict gnawed. Obey the Lord, risk his family, or defy and face the manor court's wrath. The village buzzed, a restless hum in the dark. Old Senric hobbled by, his stick tapping, his voice raspy. Smoke's thicker, Eadric, east, a day off, maybe less. Raiders hit hard, take all, burn rest. Eadric's stomach twisted, and Aelfgifu's breath caught. Here? Our huts, she asked, her eyes wet. Senric shrugged, his face grim. Lords guard their hall, not us serfs. Ready what you can. He left, and Eadric looked at their meager pile. Eggs, grain, a spade, barely enough for the king's carts, useless against raiders. Wulfric, wide-eyed, tugged his sleeve. Pa, can we hide? I'm scared. Eadric knelt, his heart aching. We'll try, lad, he said, but the lie felt heavy. Where could serfs hide, bound to the land, their lives the Lord's? Dawn broke, gray and chill, the air heavy with smoke's faint tang. Eadric led his family to the manor, the mud sucking at their shoes, their goods clutched tight. Serfs gathered, a tired crowd. Leofric with a sack of roots, Hilda with a single hen, their faces etched with fear. Knights paced, their chainmail clanking, their eyes sharp, while carts stood ready, piled with grain and wool for the king's war. Godwin, the steward, barked, "Goods here, tools there. Road start now. 10 of you move." Eadric handed over their eggs and barley, his spade with the tools, Godwin's glare cold. Thin lot, he growled while scratching. Eadric stayed silent, the manor court's threat, fines, stocks, looming, his mind on raiders, the smoke, his family's safety. Lord Baldwin stepped out, his red cloak damp, his voice gruff. "Raiders near, east of us, hit a village, burned it. We arm, we guard, you work? Roads for the king's men, goods for the fight." The hooded messenger nodded, his eyes hidden, his presence a chill. Eadric's heart sank. Raiders real, close, and serfs left to toil exposed. Aelfgifu whispered, "Eadric, roads? You'll be out there, and us here if they come." He squeezed her hand. No answer. The conflict stark. Labor for the Lord, risk raiders, or lose all to hunger and law. Leofric, nearby, muttered, "Burned a village? We're next." Eadric, "Mud huts, no defense." Hilda, her hands trembling, added, "They'll take my grain, my kids. What's left?" A subplot stirred in young Wulfric's world. The boy, curious despite fear, lingered by a cart, watching knights load sacks, their talk low. "Raiders, half a day," one said, his sword heavy. "Baldwin stingy. Keeps us at the hall. Serfs get the brunt." Wulfric's eyes widened, and he ran to Aelfgifu, tugging her skirt. "Ma, knights won't save us. Raiders real close." Aelfgifu knelt, her face pale, pulling him close. "Hush, love, we'll manage," she said, her voice shaky, her mind racing. Knights for the Lord, serfs for the slaughter? She thought of her sister, Mildred, lost to fever, and her own kids, Wulfric and Seinberg, so small, so vulnerable. The conflict grew, Lord's orders, raiders' threat, and no shield for her family. Back at the hut, Aelfgifu faced her own battle. She tended the fire, the smoke stinging, and checked the lone hen, its clucks faint. No egg today. Seinberg crawled, her cries hungry, while Aelfgifu scraped roots, her knife dull, her hands sore. The church loomed, Father Auric's bells ringing, the tithe a quarter of their crop, a quiet foe beside the Lord's demands and raider shadow. Edith, a neighbor, slipped in, her face gaunt. "Auric's at it, Aelfgifu. More grain for the church, war or not. Says it's God's will." Aelfgifu's jaw tightened, her voice low. "God's will starves us, Edith. And raiders? What then?" Edith shook her head, leaving Aelfgifu to her fear, the tension building. Hunger, faith, danger, all closing in. Eadric at the fields, joined a road crew, 10 serfs with spades and picks, Godwin leading them out. The path was rough, muddy, rutted from carts, and they dug. The work slow, the soil heavy. Eadric's back ached, his hands blistered, his eyes scanning the east, where smoke smudged the sky. Leofric, digging beside him, grumbled, "Out here, no walls. Raiders will find us easy." Baldwin cares for his gold, not us serfs. A younger man, Oswin, quiet till now, spoke, his voice shaky. "My kin east gone, huts ash. They're fast, Eadric cruel." Eadric's fear spiked, the conflict raw. Dig for the king, leave his family, or face the Lord's wrath, all while raiders crept near. Days dragged, the toil endless, the smoke thicker. Eadric worked the road, his spade dull, his thoughts on Aelfgifu alone, the kids scared. At home, Aelfgifu stretched their stores, roots, a handful of grain, her hands trembling, Steinberg's cries sharp. Wulfric, brave, watched the woods, whispering, "Ma, I'll guard us," his stick a pretend sword. Aelfgifu smiled, her heart breaking, the raiders a ghost in the trees. That night, old Senric hobbled by, his eyes dark. "Smoke's close, Eadric," raiders moving fast. Words they hid at night, "Take all." Eadric's chest tightened, Aelfgifu's hand cold in his. A distant shout, a horse's gallop, broke the quiet. A night, voice urgent, serfs. "Manor now. Raiders seen miles off, coming." Eadric's pulse raced, Aelfgifu's eyes wide, Wulfric and Steinberg clinging close. Smoke grew, the east aglow, the manor calling, danger near. Could they ready, could they hide, or would raiders end it all? The night's urgent shout, "Serfs! Manor now. Raiders seen, miles off, coming." Pierced the night, sending a jolt of fear through Eadric as he stood outside his wattle and daub hut, the cold air thick with the growing scent of smoke from the east. Aelfgifu's grip on his arm was tight, her eyes wide, her breath fast as Wulfric clung to his leg, whimpering, "Pa, they're coming, aren't they?" Steinberg's cries rose, sharp and scared, in Aelfgifu's arms, blending with the panicked murmurs of neighbors stumbling from their huts in this muddy village of 1032 England. The glow on the horizon, faint but red, hinted at fire, at raiders, and the weight of serfdom. 4 days of labor, the mill fee, the church's tithe, crashed against this new terror, a storm of conflict building to a breaking point. Eadric's heart raced, his mind a whirl. Could they face this, or would it all come crashing down? Eadric pulled his family close, his voice low, urgent. "We go to the manor, stay together." Aelfgifu nodded, her face pale, scooping up Steinberg as Eadric grabbed their spade, the only tool left, and a small sack of grain. Meager, but all they had for Lord Baldwin's carts. The village was alive with chaos, serfs running, clutching hens, roots, whatever they could carry, their shoes squelching in mud. Leofric dashed by, his eyes wild, a pick in hand. "Eadric, they're close, miles, maybe hours. Huts won't stand." Hilda, her shawl slipping, gasped, "Smoke's thick. Raiders will take everything, kids, all." Eadric's stomach churned, the threat of raiders, wild men, torching, stealing, real and near, the manor's call of faint hope against the rising dread. The path to the manor was a slog, mud deep, the air cold and heavy with smoke's acrid bite. Wulfric stumbled, his small hand in Eadric's, his voice shaking. "Pa, will the Lord save us?" Eadric's throat tightened. No answer sure. Serfs were bound to the land, to toil, but protection? He thought of tales, villages burned, families scattered, and squeezed Wulfric's hand. "We'll see, lad." Aelfgifu, Steinberg crying against her, whispered, "Eadric, if you're on the roads and raiders hit here." Her fear mirrored his, the conflict tearing at him. Obey the Lord, dig roads for the king, or stay, guard his own, risking the manor court's wrath. The glow east grew, a red stain, and distant shouts, maybe screams, carried on the wind. The manor yard was a frenzy, torches flaring, knights in chainmail barking orders, horses stamping. Carts brimmed with grain, wool, tools, all for the king's war, while serfs crowded, their faces gaunt, their hands full of meager goods. Godwin, the steward, paced, his voice sharp. Grain here, tools there. Road crew, ready at dawn. Raiders or not, work goes on. Eadric handed over their sack, the spade, his heart sinking as Godwin's eyes narrowed. Scant, Eadric, Lord needs more. Eadric bit his tongue, the threat of fine stocks heavy, his eyes darting to the east, the smoke thicker, the glow brighter. Lord Baldwin stood tall, his red cloak whipping, the hooded messenger beside him, voice low. Raiders, hours off. Roads must hold for the king's men. Guard the manor tight. Eadric's fear spiked. Serfs to toil, lords to hide. Aelfgifu pulled Eadric aside, her voice a desperate whisper. Roads now. Raiders coming, and you're out there exposed? What of us, Eadric? Steinberg's cries grew, Wulfric's eyes wide, and Eadric's chest ached, torn. Labor for the Lord, risk raiders, or protect his family. Defy the manor? Old Senric hobbled near, his stick sinking, his raspy voice grim. Saw it years back, Eadric. Raiders torched my kin's village, took all left ash. They're fast closed now. Eadric's breath caught, the conflict swelling. Serfdom's chains, the tithe, the mill fee, and raiders a blade at their throats. A knight shouted, smoke's near miles, maybe less. The crowd gasped, tension thick, the air alive with fear. Wulfric, small but brave, tugged Eadric's tunic, his voice trembling. Pa, I heard knights. Say they stay here, guard the Lord, not us. Raiders will get our hut. Eadric knelt, his heart racing, the boy's words a sting. Knights for the manor, serfs for the fire. He thought of their home, straw and wood, no match for torches, and Aelfgifu alone the kid scared. Meanwhile, Aelfgifu faced her own dread. Edith, her neighbor, lingered, her face thin, her words rushed. Aelfgifu, Father Aelric's here. Wants tithe now, war or not. A quarter, he says, or no grace. Aelfgifu's jaw tightened, her hands shaking as she rocked Steinberg. Grace? We'll starve. Edith, raiders, lord, church, all taking. The church's bell rang, a slow drone, Father Aelric's shadow looming. The tithe a quiet foe amid the rising storm. Eadric joined the road crew, 10 serfs, spades in hand, Godwin leading, his horse snorting. The path was rough, mud thick, the air choked with smoke, the east aglow. Eadric dug, his arms burning, his eyes scanning the trees, heart pounding. Raiders could strike, swift and unseen. Leofric beside him panted, out here, Eadric, we're bait. Raiders will hit. No knights for us. Oswin, young and scared, whispered, my cousin's village gone, smoke, screams all night. They're near. Eadric's grip tightened, the conflict raw. Dig for the king, leave his family, or run. Face the Lord's wrath, all while the glow grew. The smoke stung, a distant thud of hooves echoed. Back at the village, Aelfgifu toiled, her hands raw, stoking the fire, guarding their last hen. Steinberg cried, hungry, Wulfric at the door, stick in hand, watching the woods. Ma, I'll fight him, he said, his voice small, brave. Aelfgifu's heart broke, her smile weak, her eyes on the east, the red glow brighter, smoke heavy. A shout came, a villager running. Smoke's close, raiders, hours off, maybe. Panic rippled, doors slammed, hens clucked, and Aelfgifu clutched the kids, her mind racing. Eadric gone, raiders near, no walls, no help. She whispered a prayer, but the church's tithe, the Lord's carts, the raiders' threat drowned her hope, tension coiling tight. Night fell, the air cold, the smoke thick, the glow a fiery line. Eadric dug, his spade heavy, his breath ragged, the woods dark, alive with shadows. Hooves a cry, real or not. Godwin barked, keep on, roads for the king. But Eadric's eyes darted, fear for Aelfgifu, the kids burning. At the hut, Aelfgifu held Wulfric and Steinberg, the fire low, the night alive with sounds, wind or footsteps. A horn blared, sharp, close from the east, then shouts, a knight galloping, voice wild. Raiders, seen too close, serfs, manor now. Eadric froze, his spade dropping, Aelfgifu's cry distant, the globe blazing, smoke choking, hooves thundering near. Raiders here, now. Would the manor save them, or would serfdom's chains break them all? The knights cry, raiders, seen too close, serf's manor now. Cut through the choking smoke, a blade of panic that froze Eadric mid-dig, his spade slipping from his blistered hands into the muddy road. The thunder of hooves grew louder, the red glow in the east blazed brighter, and the air in 1032 England was thick with the acrid sting of burning fields. Aelfgifu's distant shout, sharp with fear, echoed from the village, pulling at Eadric's heart as he thought of her, Wulfric and Steinberg, alone in their flimsy wattle and daub hut. The serfs around him, Leofric, Oswin, and the rest, dropped tools, their faces pale, eyes wide as Godwin, the steward, barked, "Move, you lot! To the manor, quick!" Eadric's pulse raced, his legs heavy, torn between the Lord's order and his family, the weight of serfdom, 4 days of labor, the mill fee, the church's tithe, crashing against the raiders' threat, a conflict roaring toward a breaking point in medieval Europe. Eadric ran, mud sucking at his shoes, the smoke stinging his eyes, the other serfs stumbling beside him, their breaths ragged. Leofric panted, "They're here, Eadric. Raiders will burn us out." Oswin, young and trembling, gasped, "My kin east gone, all gone. We're next." The road stretched, dark and slick, the manor's torches a faint beacon, the eastern glow a fiery menace. Eadric's mind spun, raiders, wild and ruthless, torching huts, stealing grain, and him, out here, far from Aelfgifu and the kids. He reached the village, heart pounding, and found chaos, serfs running, hens squawking, smoke thick. Aelfgifu burst from their hut, Steinberg crying in her arms, Wulfric clutching her skirt, his stick raised like a sword. "Eadric," she cried, her voice breaking, "they're close. I hear shouts, hooves." He pulled them close, his chest tight, the danger real, the manor's safety a slim hope. The serfs flooded the manor yard, a frantic crowd, mud-caked and scared, their meager goods, sacks, tools, piled in carts for the king's war. Knights in chainmail shouted, horses rearing, torches flaring against the night. Godwin's voice cut through, "Inside, serfs. Bring what you've got. Guard the walls." Eadric's stomach twisted. Guard the walls? Serfs, with no weapons, no armor, against raiders? Lord Baldwin emerged, his red cloak whipping, the hooded messenger at his side, face still hidden, voice low. "Raiders a mile off, fast armed. We hold the manor. Save the stores." Aelfgifu gripped Eadric, her eyes wild. "Us fight? Eadric, we're serfs, not soldiers." Wulfric, small and brave, tugged his sleeve. "Pa, I'll help, I'll swing my stick." Eadric's heart ached, the conflict soaring. Obey, risk their lives, or flee, face the Lord's wrath? Then came the twist, a jolt that shook Eadric's core. A knight, breathless, galloped in, his armor dented, his voice raw. "My lord, betrayal. The messenger spoke to raiders east last night. He's led him here." The crowd gasped, eyes turning to the hooded man, who stiffened, his hands clenching. Baldwin's face darkened, his shout booming, "You traitor, speak." The messenger stepped back, hood slipping, revealing a scarred face, eyes cold. "The king's war starves us all. Raiders pay better," he snarled, then bolted, leaping a cart, vanishing into the dark. Eadric's breath caught, Aelfgifu's grip bruising, betrayal from within, guiding raiders to their door. The stakes surged, serfdom's chains, taxes, tithes, labor, tangled with treachery, raiders closing in. Godwin roared, "Find him! Serfs, pile goods, bar the gates." Knights scrambled, but the smoke grew thicker, shouts louder, hooves a rising thunder. Eadric pulled his family close, mud slick, the manor's stone walls a frail shield. Leofric, beside him, muttered, "A traitor, Eadric, led him to us. We're meat, no hope." Hilda, trembling, clutch her hen, "They'll burn us, take all, kids, grain gone." Eadric's mind raced. The messenger's plot, raiders near, The Lord's orders to guard, fight, with spades and sticks. He looked at Aelfgifu, her face pale, Steinberg's cries sharp, Wulfric's eyes big, and felt the tension coil, a storm ready to burst. Smoke choked the air, the glow blazed, a distant cry, raiders or wind. Aelfgifu's own fear flared, a subplot of desperation. She huddled with the kids, the manor yard chaos, serfs piling sacks, knights barring gates. Edith, her neighbor, grabbed her arm, voice shaking. Aelfgifu, Father Auric's here, demands tithe now, raiders or not. Says God's wrath if we don't. Aelfgifu's jaw clenched, her hands trembling. Wrath? Raiders will kill us, Edith, and church takes our last grain. Father Auric loomed, his robes dark, voice droning. A quarter child for salvation. Give or be damned. Aelfgifu's heart pounded, the conflict tearing. Church's tithe, Lord's demands, a traitor's plot, raiders at their heels. She held Steinberg tight, Wulfric close, her eyes on the east, the glow of fire, the threat real. Eadric pushed to the wall, gripped his spade, serfs beside him, Leofric, Oswin, others, tools raised, no match for swords. Godwin barked, "Hold, you lot! Protect the stores!" Knights stood behind, armor glinting, but few, too few, and Eadric's gut churned. Traitor gone, raiders led here, serfs to die. A shout rang, a serf pointing east. "Look! Torches, men!" Dots of flame bob, close, too close, hooves a roar, shadows moving in the smoke. Eadric's pulse hammered, his eyes on Aelfgifu, the kids, huddled by a cart, her face a mask of fear. Old Cenric, stick shaking, rasped, "They're here, Eadric, fast, fierce. We're lost." The manor gates creaked, knights yelled, serfs trembled, the air thick, the glow ablaze. The tension peaked, the night alive with dread. A horn blared, harsh, near, and a cry. Wild guttural, split the air, raiders breaking from the trees, shapes in the smoke, torches high. Eadric's spade shook, his breath short, his family behind him, unprotected. Aelfgifu's voice broke. "Eadric, they're coming. What do we do?" Wulfric, brave, raised his stick, Steinberg wailed, and serfs pressed close, their tools frail, their hope thin. Godwin shouted, "Hold the line!" But knights shifted, some to the hall, guarding the Lord, not them. The traitor's deed, the Lord's orders, the church's tithe, raiders' fire, all crashed, the stakes sky high. Hooves thundered, torches flared, a shadow loomed, a shout rang, raiders here now. Would the manor hold, or would serfdom's weight bury them all? The raiders' guttural war, cries shattered the smoky night. Their torches blazing like stars fallen to earth as they charged from the trees toward Lord Baldwin's manor in 1032 England. Eadric gripped his spade, his heart hammering, sweat mixing with the mud on his face as he stood with the serfs. Leofric, Oswin, and others, in a ragged line, their tools no match for the swords glinting in the firelight. Aelfgifu's scream cut through, her voice raw. "Eadric, they're here!" As she huddled with Wulfric and Steinberg behind a cart, their small faces pale with terror. The manor yard was chaos, knights shouting, gates creaking, smoke choking the air, the red glow from the east a fiery wall. Serfs, bound by 4 days of labor, the mill fee, the church's tithe, and now a traitor's betrayal, faced raiders ready to burn their world to ash. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and this moment, with hooves thundering and torches closing in, was the breaking point, the climax of their desperate struggle. Eadric's legs trembled, but he held firm, his eyes locked on Aelfgifu and the kids, his reason to fight. Godwin, the steward, roared, "Hold, serfs! Protect the stores!" But knights retreated toward the manor hall, guarding Lord Baldwin, leaving the serfs exposed. The raiders, wild men in furs, faces painted, axes raised, surged closer, their shouts a chilling roar. Eadric swung his spade as one lunged, the wood cracking against an arm, the raiders stumbling but rising fast. Leofric fought beside him, his pick glancing off a shield, while Oswin, young and scared, fell back, a cry escaping as a blade nicked his shoulder. The serfs were no warriors, their strength worn by plow and sickle, but fear for their families drove them, a desperate stand against the storm. Aelfgifu, clutching Steinberg, pulled Wulfric close, his stick raised, his small voice fierce. "I'll help, Pa." She whispered prayers, her heart racing. The church's tithe forgotten, Father Aelric's droning voice a distant memory. Edith, nearby, screamed as a raider's torch flew, landing near a cart, flames licking the wood. Aelfgifu grabbed a sack, beating the fire, her hands burning, her eyes on Eadric, fighting, outnumbered. The gates groaned, splintering under axes, and a knight shouted, "Hold the hall. Let the serfs take the brunt." Aelfgifu's stomach twisted, betrayed by lords, by the traitor messenger, by the chains of serfdom itself. The conflict peaked, raiders pouring in, serfs falling, the manor teetering on collapse. Then a horn blared, sharp and clear, not from the raiders but from the west. Hooves thundered, new shadows breaking through the smoke. Knights, not Baldwins, their banners unfamiliar, swords flashing. Eadric froze, his spade mid-swing, as the newcomers crashed into the raiders, steel clanging, cries rising. The raiders faltered, their line breaking, some turning to fight, others fleeing into the dark. Leofric gasped, "Who, King's men?" Oswin, clutching his shoulder, panted, "Allies, maybe God's grace." Eadric's breath caught, hope flickering, but the fight raged on, raiders still swinging, the manor yard a mess of mud, blood, and fire. He pushed forward, reaching Aelfgifu, pulling her and the kids behind a stone wall, his voice hoarse, "Stay low, love." The new knights, led by a broad man in shining armor, cut through, their horses trampling raiders, their swords swift. Baldwin emerged, his red cloak torn, shouting, "Hold, hold," as he joined the fray, his own knights rallying. Eadric fought on, his spade heavy, driving off a raider near the carts, his strength fading but fueled by Aelfgifu's cry, "Eadric, we're here." The raiders thinned, their torches dropping, their shouts fading as they retreated, chased by the new knights into the smoky woods. The manor stood, battered but whole, the carts safe, the serfs alive, barely. Eadric sank to his knees, Aelfgifu rushing to him, Steinberg wailing, Wulfric hugging his legs. "We made it," she whispered, tears streaking her face, but Eadric's eyes scanned the dark, the traitor's escape a lingering sting. The main conflict, raiders, lords' demands, serfdom's grind, found resolution in the dawn's gray light. The new knights, sent by a neighboring lord allied to the king, had tracked the raiders, saving Baldwin's manor by chance. Baldwin, shaken, waved off the road labor, his voice gruff, "You fought. Enough for now." The serfs, bruised and weary, gathered their tools, their goods, and trudged home, the carts still full for the king, but their lives spared. Aelfgifu tended Eadric's cuts, her hands gentle, while Wulfric chattered, "Pa, you were brave." Steinberg cooed, hunger quieted by a crust Aelfgifu shared. The church's tithe loomed, Father Aelric silent for once, the mill fee unpaid but forgotten in the chaos. Serfdom's weight eased, just a fraction, the raiders gone, the manor safe. But then, the final twist, a shock that stole Eadric's breath. Old Cenric, hobbling through the village, stopped by their hut, his face pale, his stick trembling. "Eadric, word from the woods. Knights caught a man, hooded, scarred. The traitor messenger, alive, talking." Eadric's eyes widened, Aelfgifu's hand freezing on his arm. Cenric leaned close, his voice a rasp. "Says he wasn't alone. Godwin, the steward, took coin to weaken the manor, let raiders in for a share. Baldwin's men have him now, chained, but he's swearing revenge on us serfs. Says he'll name us as plotters to save his skin." Eadric's heart lurched, Aelfgifu gasping, "Godwin, our steward, against us?" Wulfric's eyes grew big, Steinberg fussed, and the village buzzed, whispers flying. Godwin trusted a traitor? The climax resolved the raiders' threat, the lord's immediate demands, but this betrayal within, Godwin's treachery, raised new stakes. Eadric held his family, mud-caked, exhausted, the smoke clearing, the east quiet. Baldwin's justice loomed. Would Godwin's lies drag serfs to the manor court? Fines, or worse? The king's war, the church's tithe, serfdom's grind waited, unbroken, but Eadric's resolve hardened. "We'll face it, love," he told Aelfgifu, her nod firm, their kids close. The traitor's plot, Godwin's fall, hung unresolved, a shadow over their lives. Serfs, bound to the land, fought and survived, but the manor's secrets, the Lord's wrath, whispered of more to come. Eadric stood, spade in hand, ready for dawn's next toil, the suspense lingering, medieval Europe's weight unbroken. The dawn broke gray and quiet over the muddy village in 1032 England, the smoke from the east fading, the red glow of raiders' fires gone, but the sting of betrayal lingered like a bruise. Eadric stood outside his wattle and daub hut, his spade leaning against the wall, his hands still raw from the night's desperate fight. Aelfgifu sat inside, tending a small fire, her face tired but soft as she rocked Steinberg, the baby's whimpers quiet now. Wulfric, curled on the straw mat, clutched his stick, his small chest rising and falling, dreams chasing the bravery he'd shown. Old Cenric's words, Godwin, the steward, a traitor, plotting with raiders, now chained and swearing revenge, hung heavy, a final twist in the serf's grueling saga. Life as a serf in medieval Europe sucked, and though the raiders were gone, the weight of serfdom, 4 days of labor, the mill fee, the church's tithe, and Godwin's treachery left Eadric and his family teetering. The manor's shadow still dark, their future uncertain but hard-earned. Eadric stepped inside, the damp air cool, the fire's faint warmth a small comfort. Aelfgifu looked up, her eyes searching his. "Godwin, Eadric, will he drag us down?" she whispered, her hands tightening on Steinberg. Eadric knelt, his calluses rough, as he took her hand. "He'll try, love, but we fought, we held. Baldwin's no fool, he'll see the truth." The words felt fragile, but the serfs stand against raiders, their spades and picks raised, had shifted something. Lord Baldwin, shaken by the attack, had waved off the road labor, a rare mercy, and the king's carts rolled out, piled with grain and wool, leaving the village bruised but standing. The church's tithe, Father Aelric's quarter demand, loomed, but for now, the priest was silent, his bells quiet after the chaos. Morning brought the manor's call, softer this time, but urgent. Eadric joined the serfs, Leofric, Hilda, Oswin, and others, in the yard, mud-caked and weary, their eyes wary. Knights stood guard, fewer now, the allied lord's men gone west, chasing raiders' remnants. Baldwin emerged, his red cloak patched, his face grim, Godwin in chains beside him, head bowed, eyes burning. The traitor messenger, scarred and hooded, stood shackled too, caught in the woods, his defiance broken. Baldwin's voice boomed. "These men betrayed us, led raiders for coin, weakened our walls." The serfs murmured, anger flaring, Hilda muttering, "Godwin took our grain, our trust." Eadric's jaw tightened, remembering Godwin's sharp quill, his cold demands, now a traitor's mask. Godwin lifted his head, voice sly, "I named serfs, my lord. Eadric, Leofric, plotters all. Spare him, I did, for loyalty." Eadric's heart lurched, Aelfgifu's gasp sharp beside him, Wulfric clinging to her skirt. Baldwin's eyes narrowed, his hand on his sword. "Lies, steward," he growled. Old Cenric hobbled forward, stick tapping, voice raspy. "My lord, serfs fought. Eadric, Leofric, all, spades against axes, saved your stores. Godwin took coin, I saw him, knights back with that hooded snake." The crowd roared, serfs nodding, Oswin shouting, "Truth. We bled for you." Baldwin's gaze shifted cold, then nodded. "Court will judge," he said, waving knights to drag Godwin and the messenger away, their chains clanking, Godwin's glare a fading threat. The serfs exhaled, tension easing, but Eadric's chest stayed tight. Justice was rare, and serfs were tools, not heroes. Baldwin spoke again, voice gruff. "You held, you worked. No roads, no extra grain for now. Back to fields, 3 days as before. A murmur rippled. 3 days, not 4. A small victory. The mill fee unspoken. A pause in serfdom's grind. Aelfgifu squeezed Eadric's hand, her eyes wet. We're safe, Eadric us the kids. Wulfric Bull now grinned. Pa, we won. Eadric smiled, lifting Steinberg, her coups alight in the gloom, but his mind lingered. Godwin's fate, the church, winter's hunger, all unresolved threads in their weary lives. Back at the hut, life crept on, the slow, dull rhythm of serfdom. Eadric plowed the fields, 3 days for Baldwin, his back aching, the mud deep, but lighter without Godwin's glare. Leofric beside him joked, no steward's quill. Feels free, eh? Hilda, cutting barley, smiled, her hands steadier. Raiders gone, Godwin chained, small wins, Eadric. Oswin, his shoulder bandaged, worked slow, his voice soft. Thought I'd die, but we held. Eadric nodded. The fight a scar, the serfs stand a quiet pride. They weren't free, bound to the land, taxes, tithes, but they'd faced raiders, betrayal, and survived, a spark of strength in medieval Europe's grind. Aelfgifu, at home, stretched their stores. Half a sack roots, 1 hen now, its egg a treasure. She mended tunics, her needle slow, Wulfric fetching twigs, Steinberg toddling, who giggles a bomb. Edith stopped by, her face softer. Auric's backed off, Aelfgifu, no tithe push, not yet. Raiders scared him too. Aelfgifu laughed, rare and bright. God's wrath, my foot, serfs fought, not priests. The church's shadow lingered, Father Auric's bells a drone, but the quarter tithe paused, a breath in their struggle. Aelfgifu looked at her kids, Wulfric stick a toy now. Steinberg's hunger eased, and felt a quiet resolve. Serfdom sucked, but they'd endure together. Days passed, the village healing, mud drying, smoke gone. Old Senric, a subplot's voice, shared news. Godwin and the messenger faced the manor court, banished, not killed, their lies exposed. Baldwin's wary now, he rasped, warming his hands by Eadric's fire. Keeps knights close, trusts serfs a bit. You're doing. Eadric nodded, the traitor's threat gone, but serfdom's chains, labor, taxes, land, unbroken. Wulfric, listening, asked, Pa, will raiders come back? Eadric hugged him, maybe lad, but we'll stand like before. The boy grinned, his fear fading, a serf's son, born to toil but brave. Winter loomed, hunger a guest, but the serfs faced it, their huts patched, their fires lit. Eadric and Aelfgifu counted sacks, stretched roots, shared neg, their love shield. The manor stood, Baldwin quieter, his greed checked by the fight, the allied lords aid a warning. The king's war rolled on, distant, the carts gone, serfs forgotten but alive. Father Auric preached, his tithes softer, the church a weight, not a blade. Eadric plowed, Aelfgifu cooked, Wulfric played, Steinberg grew, and the village hummed, scarred but steady. As night fell, Eadric stood outside, the stars clear, the air cold, Aelfgifu beside him, Steinberg asleep, Wulfric dreaming. We made it, Eadric, she said, her voice warm, her hand in his. He nodded, the manor shadow small, their hut a home, hard won. Serfdom in medieval Europe sucked, taxes, tithes, labor, raiders, betrayal, but they'd fought, loved, lived. The takeaway lingered. Serfs, lowest of all, held strength in their hands, their hearts, their will. Eadric kissed Aelfgifu, the stars above, the mud below, and whispered, tomorrow we plow. The grind went on, but they stood, a family, a village, unbroken. Their story is sleepy echo of resilience in a world that tried to crush them.